Segment 7. The crypto queen of Bulgaria, Ruya, once praised as a financial visionary, promised riches through her crypto, but behind the glamorous facade was a Ponzi scheme that duped billions from investors globally. She vanished in 2017, boarding a flight from Sofia to Athens, and was never seen again. Interpol now lists her as one of the world's most wanted fugitives. The case is ongoing, with multiple arrests across Europe, but Ignatova remains a ghost. Many believe she's dead. Others think she's protected by high-level criminal networks. Her legacy, one of the largest crypto frauds in history. Segment 8. The Nightcrawler of Mumbai. In 2011, Mumbai police were baffled by a string of brutal victims, mostly elderly women, were found strangled with their own saris. There were no signs of forced entry. CCTV finally caught a figure climbing walls like a spider, moving between balconies with eerie speed. The man, later identified as Vijay Paland, used inside information from apartment staff to target victims. When caught, he confessed, with Chillin.com. His motive: they were alone. And I was curious. Paland remains on death row, with multiple appeals rejected. His case drew comparisons to serial killers in the West, rare in India. Segment 9. Frozen Lake Secrets. In 2008, beneath the frozen surface of Lac des Écorces, Quebec, fishermen discovered something that shouldn't have been there. A submerged SUV with 3 skeletons inside. At first ruled an accident, further digging revealed a horrifying truth. The victims had been poisoned, and the car deliberately sunk. Investigators traced it to a family patriarch, Maurice, who confessed to killing his wife and sons to start a new life in Alberta under a false name. His motive: debt and a secret affair. The confession was caught on a wire during a staged confession to a fake priest. Segment 10. The Red Room Murders. Tokyo police faced a grim puzzle when bodies of 5 young women were found across the city, each with a red silk ribbon tied to their wrist. Online rumors pointed to a dark web stream, the Red Room, where the killings were allegedly broadcast live. While much remains unconfirmed, authorities eventually tracked the IPs to a single hacker with dissociative identity disorder. His apartment was a maze of wires, servers, and cryptic notes. Japan's strict privacy laws obscured many details, but the psychological profile shocked even seasoned pro. He remains in psychiatric custody, his trial indefinitely suspended. Every city hides its secrets, right? Every alley echoes with stories that just beg to be told. Think about it: behind closed doors, in cozy homes and bustling streets, there's this lurking human darkness just waiting for the right moment to strike. It's kind of eerie when you really think about it. Tonight, we're diving deep into some chilling truths behind real casino. These stories are the stuff of nightmares, and they're not made up. They're real, raw, and come from all corners of the globe. Like that infamous case in your hometown that everyone whispers about, or those unsolved mysteries that keep you up at night. So, buckle up, because we're about to unravel some spine-tingling tales that will make you see your city in a whole new light. The Ghost of Rostov. The true story of Andrei Chikatilo. Introduction. The snow fell silently over the vast, gray expanse of the Soviet Union in the winter of 1990. Behind closed doors and shuttered windows, fear had taken root. A fear born not of war, nor famine, but of something far more primal. Somewhere in the heart of Russia, a phantom was preying on the innocent. He moved between train stations and forest paths, between quiet schools and forgotten bus stops. His victims were young, vulnerable, and silenced, and by the time the authorities realized what he was, he had already killed over 50 people. This is the story of Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo, the man the world would come to know as the Butcher of Rostov, the Red Ripper, and most chillingly, the Forest Phantom. What follows is a detailed, unflinching chronicle of one of the most disturbing serial murder cases in modern history. A journey into madness, into the failures of justice, and into the mind of a killer who slipped through the cracks of a crumbling empire. Chapter 1. Roots of Evil. Born on October 16, 1936, in the Ukrainian village of Yab, Andrei Chikatilo entered the world during one of the darkest periods in Soviet history. The nation was reeling from the Holodomor, a man-made famine that claimed millions of lives. Stories of cannibalism circulated in hushed tones, and Chikatilo's own mother, Anna, allegedly warned him as a child that his older brother had been kidnapped and eaten during the famine. Whether this tale was true or not, it planted a seed of fear and confusion in the young boy. Andrei's childhood was defined by hunger, humiliation, and violence. His father, Roman, was drafted into World War II and captured by the Germans, a dishonor in Stalin's Russia, where prisoners of war were seen as traitors. When he returned, broken and shamed, the family lived in a one-room hut, sharing a bed with lice-infested straw. The neighbors remembered Andrei as a strange, sickly boy, intelligent, yes, but socially stunted, prone to crying, and often bullied. Puberty brought its own horrors. Chikatilo discovered that he suffered from chronic impotence. His inability to perform sexually was not just a personal torment, it became the defining psychological wound of his life. He developed intense feelings of inadequacy, self-loathing, and rage, all of which he would later project onto his victims. Despite these early traumas, Chikatilo was a high-achieving student. He devoured books, earned good grades, and even joined the Communist Party, a move that would later help him conceal his true nature. But the darkness inside him was growing. Chapter 2. The First Kill in 1971. Chikatilo moved to the city of Shakti and began working as a teacher. This was a turning point. Surrounded by children, many of whom came from broken homes, he found both temptation and opportunity. Numerous students reported that he would grope them during class or watch them in the bathrooms. Complaints were filed, but in Soviet society, scandals were often swept under the rug to preserve the illusion of order. Rather than facing consequences, Chikatilo was quietly dismissed. He bounced from job to job, eventually becoming a traveling supply clerk for a raw materials company. This gave him an excuse to move around the country, and more importantly, allowed him to scout remote, poorly monitored locations, the perfect hunting grounds. His first confirmed murder took place in December 1978. The victim was a 9-year-old girl named Yelena Z. Chikatilo lured her into a small shed near a riverbank in Shakti, promising her gum and toys. Once inside, he attempted to rape her, but when he couldn't perform, he lashed out in fury. He stabbed her multiple times and mutilated her body, achieving orgasm through the act of violence. He dumped her corpse in a nearby river. The police arrested another man for the crime, a 25-year-old with a history of petty theft. Under intense interrogation, he confessed to a crime he didn't commit. He was executed by firing squad. Meanwhile, Chikatilo vanished into the background, emboldened by how easily he had gotten away with murder. Chapter 3. A pattern of death between 1981 and 1990. Chikatilo embarked on one of the most prolific killing sprees in history. His victims ranged from young boys and girls to adult women. Most were hitchhikers, runaways, or people who wouldn't be immediately missed. He preferred train stations and wooded paths, luring victims with offers of food, alcohol, or help. His method became ritualistic: lure, attack, mutilate, and discard. He would stab his victims dozens of times, often targeting the eyes. Psychologists later determined that Chikatilo believed his victims' souls could escape through their eyes and come back to haunt him unless he destroyed them. In many cases, he would bite off body parts or remove internal organs. The sheer brutality baffled investigators. Forensic teams found semen on many of the victims, but the technology to analyze DNA was still in its infancy. A blood test showed that Chikatilo had type A blood, while the semen found was type AB, a contradiction that would delay his capture for years. The Soviet authorities were slow to admit that a serial killer was at large. Serial murder was considered a Western phenomenon, incompatible with the supposed moral superiority of the communist state. As a result, early warnings were ignored, evidence mishandled, and files buried. Chapter 4. Hunter and Hunted. The turning point came in 1984, when a special task force was formed under the command of Mikhail, working with forensic psychiatrist Dr. Alexander Buk. The team began to build a psychological profile of the killer, the first of its kind in Soviet criminal history. Bukhanovsky's profile described the killer as a man in his 40s or 50s, with a history of sexual dysfunction, likely a loner, possibly married, and with a job that allowed him to travel. This was uncannily accurate. By this point, Chikatilo had been arrested once in 1984 on suspicion of theft. While in custody, he was questioned about the murders but released due to the faulty blood type tests. Over the next 6 years, the task force worked tirelessly, collecting data, mapping crime scenes, and interviewing hundreds of suspects. They began to notice that many of the victims had last been seen near train stations. Surveillance was increased. Undercover officers posed as vagrants, watching and waiting. In November 1990, a plainclothes officer named Igor Rybakov spotted Chikatilo at a train station in Novich. He was behaving strangely, talking to himself, approaching children, and wandering near the woods. Rybakov took note of his appearance and alerted the team. When Chikatilo was finally brought in, he denied everything, but investigators searched his home and found a trove of incriminating evidence: a knife, a rope, and a briefcase containing pornographic literature and notes detailing his crimes. Under pressure and psychological manipulation by Dr. Bukhanovsky, Chikatilo eventually confessed. He admitted to 56 murders. Authorities confirmed 53. In shocking detail, he described each killing: where, when, how, with chilling calm. The mask had finally slipped. Chapter 5. Trial and Execution. Chikatilo's trial began in April 1992 and became a media spectacle. Held in a metal cage to protect him from the enraged families of his victims, he ranted, sang, and exposed himself. But behind the theatrics was a man clearly aware of his crimes. He pleaded insanity, but the court disagreed. On October 15, 1992, Andrei Chikatilo was found guilty of 52 counts of murder and sentenced to death. He was executed by a single gunshot behind the right ear on February 14, 1994. Epilogue. Haunted ground. The Chikatilo case changed Soviet and Russian policing forever. It exposed the failures of a system more concerned with appearances than justice. It led to reforms in criminal profiling, forensic science, and interagency cooperation. But for many, the wounds remain. The families of the victims still mourn. The forests and train stations of Rostov remain stained with the memory of a man who hid in plain sight, and of a society that was not prepared to face its own darkness. Even now, in the quiet corners of Russia, some still whisper his name. The Ghost of the Moors of Death, the chilling story of Ian Brady and Mira Hindley. Introduction. The wind swept cold across the desolate moors outside Manchester, England. Rolling hills, empty expanses, and peat black soil created a haunting backdrop for one of the most monstrous crimes in British history. In the early 1960s, a pair of lovers, Ian Brady and Mira Hindley, would stain this silent wilderness with blood, luring children and teens to their deaths. Their crimes, immortalized as the Moors' murders, would send shockwaves through the UK, shattering the nation's sense of post-war innocence. This is a story of manipulation, sadism, and murder, of how a charismatic psychopath and his devoted accomplice unleashed horror in the name of pleasure and control. What follows is the full, unflinching account of their crimes, capture, and the dark psychological descent that led to 5 innocent lives being cut brutally short. This is the true story of Ian Brady and Mira Hindley. Chapter 1. Roots in Darkness. Ian Brady was born Ian Duncan Stewart on January 2, 1938, in Glasgow, Scotland. His mother, a waitress, was unwed and destitute, unable to care for him. She gave him up to a local family. As he grew older, Ian displayed early signs of sociopathy, cruelty to animals, manipulative behavior, and an obsession with Nazi ideology. By his teenage years, he had a growing fascination with the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, the writings of the Marquis de Sade, and Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf. In contrast, Mira Hindley was born into a working-class Catholic family on July 23, 1942, in Crumpsall, Manchester. Her early life was marked by instability and violence. Her father, an abusive alcoholic, beat her regularly, teaching her that showing weakness was shameful. After the death of a close friend in a drowning accident, Mira hardened emotionally. She grew up craving love and stability, something she believed she found in Brady. Their paths crossed in 1961 when Mira took a clerical job at Millwoods Merchandising in Manchester. Brady also worked there. Mira was immediately captivated by the mysterious, brooding man who read philosophy during lunch and seemed to harbor dark secrets. She began to mold herself to fit his interests, bleaching her hair, reading his favorite books, and eventually embracing his extremist, violent worldview. Their relationship soon became a psychological echo chamber of cruelty. Chapter 2. Bond of Blood. Brady's influence over Hindley was absolute. He introduced her to sadomasochistic pornography, convinced her of his intellectual superiority, and slowly normalized the idea of murder. In his twisted mind, there were not criminals but Nietzschean superhumans above morality and law. By early 1963, their fantasies evolved into action. Brady declared that the ultimate thrill would be to commit the perfect murder. Hindley, eager to please, became the bait. Their first victim was Pauline Red, a 16-year-old girl known to Hindley's younger sister. On July 12, 1963, Hindley lured Pauline into a van by asking for help searching for a lost glove on the moors. Brady waited nearby. Once isolated, he raped and murdered Pauline, while Hindley stood watch. They buried her body on Saddleworth Moor. Pauline's disappearance sparked little immediate suspicion. The pair had chosen well. Vulnerable, trusting, and without immediate connections to the investigation. Chapter 3. A trail of victims. Next came 12-year-old John Kill. On November 23, 1963, he was approached by Hindley and Brady at a market. They offered him a lift home. He was never seen alive again. His body was later found buried in a shallow grave, tied with string and sexually assaulted. In June 1964, they murdered Keith Bennett. Age 12, Keith was last seen walking to his grandmother's house. Brady later admitted he strangled the boy and buried him on the moors. Decades later, Keith's remains have still never been found. In December 1964, Leslie Ann Downey, just 10 years old, was abducted from a fairground. This murder was particularly deep. Hindley took photographs of Leslie naked, gagged, and terrified. An audio tape later discovered recorded her crying and begging for her life. It was played in court and would haunt jurors, police, and the nation. Finally, in October 1965, they killed Edward Evans, 17. This murder would lead to their downfall. Brady invited his new acquaintance David Smith to witness the killing, perhaps testing his loyalty or reveling in his power. But Smith was horrified. The next day he reported the murder to police. Chapter 4. Arrest and shock. Police raided Brady and Hindley's home on Wardlebrook Avenue. In the spare bedroom they found Edward Evans's body, half wrapped in plastic. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered Brady's library of sadistic literature, photographs, and audio recordings. The true horror emerged when police searched the moors. They found the bodies of John Kilbride and Leslie Ann Downey. Pauline Red would be discovered 2 decades later. Keith Bennett remains missing. Brady and Hindley were charged with multiple murders. Their 1966 trial was one of the most sensational in British legal history. The taped cries of Leslie Ann were played to a stunned courtroom. The jury took just over 2 hours to convict them. Both were sentenced to life imprisonment. Chapter 5. Prison and Infamy. Mira Hindley would spend decades behind bars attempting to reinvent herself. She claimed she was brainwashed by Brady. Some activists, including Lord Longford, campaigned for her release, but public outrage was fierce. Brady, meanwhile, reveled in his notoriety. He refused rehabilitation and insisted he was sane. In later years, he fought for the right to starve himself to death, claiming life in prison was a burden he no longer wished to bear. He died in 2017. Mira Hindley died in 2002. Neither ever expressed genuine remorse. Keith Bennett's body remains undiscovered. Epilogue. The legacy of evil. The Moors murders cast a long, dark shadow over British society. The case reshaped police procedures, media coverage of crime, and public attitudes toward sentencing. It also revealed how 2 ordinary people could descend into monstrous depravity. Ian Brady and Mira Hindley were not inhuman creatures. They were humans who chose evil, who built a private world of sadism and suffering. To this day, the Moors still whisper, and those who remember know that the silence of that empty land holds the screams of the lost.